If you told me when I was 10 years old, probably in the middle of memorizing a Bible verse while homeschooled, that as a senior in high school I would be a captain of my cross country and track teams while Nordic skiing in the winter, and I'd become an uncle during the Super Bowl, but that I'd fail three different classes at different points during the school year, I don't want to imagine how I'd react to that news. The year after I turned 18 is a year I'd relive multiple times over for one core reason that branched off into these 5 areas of my life. I'll get into each one at these timestamps if you want to skip ahead. I won't go in complete chronological order of everything that happened during the year, but I mostly will for each segment of the video. And I'll dive right in right now. I'm starting with this topic because it affects others the most, so it'll form a good foundation for the rest of the video. The night before I turned 18, I wrote a long list of everything I wanted to achieve after turning 18. This list included being a captain of my cross country and track teams, learning OLL and PLL, which are sets of Rubik's Cube algorithms, and becoming an uncle, surprisingly. I set it down in my basement that same night because I rarely go down there, and did not touch it again until about a month after I turned 19. I counted back that I had achieved 23 of the 36 goals that I set for myself. I was motivated to be a better person, mostly influenced by my little sister. Basically, around the beginning of February in 2024, she caught me watching a bad video. I never want that to happen again, so I knew it was time that I change myself. We're really close as the two youngest of 9 siblings, 5 to 6 years younger than our older siblings, and I learned how much a non-romantic relationship like that can really affect me. I strive to be a better brother, athlete, and person because of the brother-sister relationship that I have with her. This ended up being the reason I began pursuing God in a new way that I'll explain in the religion segment. And speaking of sisters, it was actually my oldest and younger sisters in particular that influenced me, not even directly or consciously, to leave the church I'd attended since childhood. I grew up in a devoutly Christian home. If I had to put a denominational label on it, because we're not Catholic or Orthodox, I'd say Protestant Baptist because we all went to a non-denominational church for years, but as Redeem Zoomer says, non-denominational Christians are just Baptists with smoke machines, like they just don't want to admit they're Baptist. For the past several months before I turned 18, I was attending this new church that I'll describe later during the religion segment more and more often, and I was attending my brother's house church. It was actually my 18th birthday specifically that I could say it was my unofficial joining day because my birthday was on a Sunday in 2024, and as he said it, I specifically chose to go to house church with him on my birthday. And it was actually this choice to leave my childhood church and attend these two other churches that played a big role in my faith growing and maturing this past year. So my family lives all across the Great Lakes in Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and New York. And we have an iMessage group chat, usually called This Person's Fan Club, basically for whenever someone has a big event like a birthday or whatnot. And we stay in close contact with that group chat. The first big surprise of the year came on my parents' birthday. They share the same birthday on June 27th. We were all playing pickleball, and then we were going to go back home, and then they would open their birthday presents. And when it came for my oldest sister and her husband to give them their present, underneath the wrapping were two baby onesies. My mom's onesie said, Grandma's Little Sunshine, and my dad's All Smiles for Grandpa. It was their official pregnancy announcement that would become grandparents, uncles, and aunts. The funniest part of the story is that I was not there when it happened. I forgot that when we got home, they were going to open their birthday presents. So I went right up to my room and I was playing Plants vs. Zombies in the same chair I'm sitting in right now. And I only went downstairs because I heard loud cheers. I went downstairs, that's what the fuss was about, and I could figure out because one thing is it was only my sisters who were cheering, so obviously that meant my sisters were happy for my oldest sister who was pregnant. And my mom holds up the one of the onesies, her onesie, without the phrase showing, and I could kind of tell what it was. I could tell what it was, but it felt too late to react, so I just sat there smiling but kind of awkwardly. I did give my brother-in-law a hug later, but it was still kind of an awkward situation. It was actually the night before. We held a surprise birthday party for them with a lot of family friends who came over. It was especially for my mom because she had turned 60. And after the party, we all watched a video that I had made. I had spent a few days writing, filming, and editing a video about my dad's oldest brother and my experience at the Vikings draft party, because we've gone there every year since it came back post-COVID in 2022. We all watched it together because at the end, I segued it into clips of all my siblings, plus one of my cousins and two of our friends, wishing them all a happy birthday. And the work I put into that video and how well it turned out actually inspired me to film this video now over a year later. Now, like in a teenager, I love both my parents to death, but my relationship with my dad often looks rocky at best, largely influenced by his relationship with my brothers. In different ways we get bothered by him, and a big reason I've learned falls in the 4 styles of communication. I learned these in sophomore communication class and first recognized applications for them when listening to my older brother talk, more argue, with my dad. He recognized that my dad used to talk only in extremes, either passive or aggressive, not understanding the best of both worlds. And this is mostly in serious conversations, because in lighthearted conversations where everybody is happy, it's very easy to avoid these 2 styles. I started to invest more in my relationship with my dad following an unfortunate incident when we drove down to Iowa to visit my grandpa before we went to our extended family's lake home. I'm fully aware when writing this that it may quote-unquote trigger my own family, so understand that I've learned to use these dark times to find light. That'll sound like the theme of the whole video because in some ways it is. We talked, he lectured me on ways to grow my personal faith, knowing I started that myself when I turned 18. Along with discussing why I struggled on my ACT, scoring well in math, so-so in science, but below average in reading and English. While reading the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, he noticed a mental block that held my reading comprehension back. When he noticed it, he told me that I'd double my score, but not in the encouraging way you may think. That night and the following morning, I was reflecting on that car ride and noticed how he tended to be what I describe as aggressive speech. He was direct with everything he said, but talking in a way like he wanted to ensure he's the only source I'd hear. Basically, he was yelling while we were sitting not 2 feet apart in the same car. That ride catalyzed the rocky relationship I initially described. I always want to grow out of those hardships, but they stick like, I usually do not like this term, trauma. I'm regularly reminded of those times, which has prevented me from building the relationship that I want with my dad. But I've also seen that grow my relationship between the other men in my family, especially my 2 oldest brothers, as the 2 brothers between us live out of state. And I mean out of state. Think from Minnesota to Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. I have grown closer to my dad and oldest brother through, as I mentioned earlier, our funny tradition of going to the draft party every year. We've gone ever since 2022, even till now 2025, and we have no plans to stop in any coming years. My dad's never been any diehard sports fan like my brother and I have, so watching the Vikings draft their next superstar every year has been a really fun way to indoctrinate him into diehard fandom. He still does not cheer as loudly as either of us do, but he cheers much louder than he did before ever going to the draft party. I'll get more into the draft party later in the video. After that car ride, skip ahead a few days, and we're all done in Iowa for our family reunion. This year was special because my grandpa turned 85, so we all threw him a big surprise birthday. We're all standing in a big circle, there are a couple dozen of us, and about 10 people gave toasts. My 2 favorite ones were from my cousin-in-law, and myself, obviously. My cousin-in-law said that because my grandpa always posts us on social media calling us his favorites, today he was our favorite, and I'd be lying if I said that did not make me cry. And then mine was just to say how much he has loved all of us, because he's been a widower for more than a decade at this point, so he invests even more into the lives of his kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids to give us all the best life possible. And I wanted to basically publicly share my appreciation for him. Unfortunately for me, as summer came to a close, I felt like I could find no time apart from cross-country and freaking calculus-based physics to devote to God, and I saw my faith, my life, and my choices behind closed doors begin to falter. However, fall time does get specially fun. As a senior in high school, I knew I'm not playing sports in college, so I knew to make this year special. I got to lead my cross country team as a captain and the team leader, which is a title passed down through hat inheritance every year at our team's banquet. I'm not wearing it right now because obviously I passed it down to the next team leader at our last banquet. When I joined the team in 2019 as a wee 7th grader, my next older brother Eric, I call him next older brother because he's just the one older than me, but he's almost 5 years older. He was the team leader when I joined. I saw how much he loved the team, which made me excited to lead it as a senior. He led with such great leadership and set such a high standard for me that I did not know why I was disappointed in the future captains in 2020, 2021, etc. And I didn't realize that until later, and I even thought of this metaphor. Every mountain you see will look small when the first one you see is Mount Everest. He led with such pristine leadership despite being sick almost the entire cross country season. He even missed his track season because it was canceled due to COVID. For those reasons, I dedicated my cross country season to him. Every grueling workout, tempo run, race PR, side cramp, you name it, was to honor the brother who I saw set the highest standard of leadership in all of high school sports. Now, a little story from Nordic skiing. Every year, the weekend before Christmas, my Nordic ski team goes up to Cable, Wisconsin, where the American Birkebeiner starts, and we ski basically all weekend. Friday and Saturday are all-day skiing, and then Sunday is just skiers' choice. Very laid back. The coaches even barely do anything. And on that day, a lot of kids went to the ski shop that had been built just the summer beforehand. That not even a mile away. It's a very close gift shop. And I knew I'd regret not getting a souvenir there, so I skied over there and to get some gifts. And I was disappointed to see that they have no Sweden merchandise. They have Norway, Finland, Denmark, even Switzerland, but nothing Sweden related. I wanted to get some Sweden merch for my dad because he's actually half Swede, half salty. But since I didn't find anything, I instead just got 13 little stickers for my 8 siblings plus me, 2 parents, and then 2 sibling in-laws. And on these stickers had little fun phrases like "more coffee please" and "winter lover." These were just little sentimental stocking stuffers. Now, the presidential election falls right between cross-country Nordic season, and because I had turned 18 earlier that year, I got to vote not only for the president, but also for our local elections here in Minnesota. As a first-year voter, I voted for Trump, so I was quite happy that he won the election, but I'm also well aware that I have siblings who are not as conservative as I am, and I know how emotional of a topic politics can become. For that reason, I avoid talking about politics except with the conservative side of my family, and this is not at all to build an echo chamber. It's just because I don't want it to turn into a yelling match or a game of insult volleyball. Then in January, my grandpa asked a few of us guys if we'd want to go to DC for the inauguration. And since my brother and I work almost every weekend, we both got our shifts covered and time off so that we could all go. And the weekend was a lot of fun, except for being quite cold the day of the inauguration, even for us Midwesterners. And the first day that we were there, we were just walking around the city sightseeing, and we happened to run into one of my favorite podcast hosts of the Daily Wire, Michael Knowles. I was actually listening to his podcast the night before, so it was a lot of fun to meet him that day. And even though I'm the only one who regularly listens to him, my dad and grandpa joined for pictures. Later that day, I realized that I wanted a hat, and I saw a street vendor selling them for $15. I did not read it beforehand, but I was still happy to have it. But back to the fun topics. The first weekend in January, I went to the National Salt Conference. I'll go more in depth during the religion segment on this. During the first or second service, I saw my oldest sister walking by with 2 of our cousins. We were in an auditorium, so I had to quickly hop out of my seat and I had to kind of hop around a few people, and I got to surprise them because I don't think they knew I was there. This is just an anecdote, but I thought it's worth including here. My family is full of football fans, so we were all watching the NFL playoffs throughout January and February. Not all together, because we all live at different places. And following both conference championship games, since Philly had beat Washington and Mahomes beat Allen again, we were all texting about how this is the worst possible Super Bowl matchup and how we're all boycotting the Super Bowl. And then my oldest sister texts, I hope I'm in labor, because she was actually due a couple days before the Super Bowl. And what's crazy is she literally gave birth during the Super Bowl. So while Mahomes was scrambling away from Milton Williams, our new little nephew was scrambling away from his mom. And for the next several weeks after that, we all got to meet him at different times. The following weekend, my sister and I actually got to meet him different days. And even now, whenever one of us has some big event, my oldest sister texts, Gray says, go, Uncle or Auntie, go. It is never not adorable, and I fully believe that that 5-month-old is saying that. Not one darn month after our nephew was born, we heard that our Wisconsin sister found a lump in her breast. So she got it checked out by a doctor, and a few days later was diagnosed with breast cancer. But my family, being the strong tower we are for each other, immediately linked arms and said, we are here for you. We bought her gift baskets, clothing, and when her hair began to fall out, all us guys collectively shaved our heads. And I dedicated my senior track season to her the same way that I did it for my brother in cross country. To lighten the situation, for a long time I wondered what it was like when a pro athlete will dedicate their performances to a loved one when they die. Like how Brett Favre played out of his mind the first game after his dad died. And with my sister, I finally had that moment. On top of that, and back to the draft party, we brought our sister along with her boyfriend. Every year leading up to the draft party, we like to go out to eat in anticipation of it. After we get the tickets, we like to get to a special dinner to celebrate our attendance being official. Last year, those tickets got us pictures with former Viking stars Everson Griffin and Adrian Peterson, and this year, we got to get pictures with the Vikings' newest Hall of Famer, Jared Allen, and former star defensive tackle, Pat Williams. Even though she felt a little sick that night, our sister and her boyfriend stayed long enough to get pictures with them, which made the whole night a lot better. And during my track races, nothing pushed me through the pain of running a 2-mile quite like knowing that no matter what I'm facing, she will deal with worse with her breast cancer. I can succeed through my pain and love her more through that. I'll run through a side ache, cramp, or plain fatigue, and the only thought going through my mind, besides whatever hype up music is running through my head, is, you're hurt? Well, your sister has cancer. Suck it up. And I dropped huge PRs as a senior. In the 800 meter, mile, and 2 mile. I only run long distance. I ran 2:21 in my only 4x8 relay as a junior, and then 2:12 in my first open 800 meter race since 8th grade. And I ran that at our true team meet. And then in the mile, I ran 4:59 twice as a junior, and then dropped down to 4:49 as a senior at conference. And in the 2 mile, which was the big one, I failed to drop 11 minutes by less than half a second, running 11 minutes, 0.4 seconds at True Team as a junior. And then as a senior, not only did I run 10:53 in my first race, breaking 11 minutes, but I dropped down to 10:32 at sections, dropping 28 seconds in the 2 mile as a senior. My sister's pain also motivated me to study for my physics final, since I was failing that class late into the year. Later in the day after my physics final, while I was stressing over what grade I'd get, I learned that my second oldest brother had gotten engaged. Needful to say, needless, my family helped me grow tremendously during my first year of adulthood. Now let's get to the other topics. None of these will be as long as the family portion because, again, the family is like the foundation of the video, so these other topics will be more like branches growing out of a tree trunk. I was pretty excited to start my senior year of school. My first year of PSEO wasn't that difficult, but I was taking 2 classes with the word calculus in them, Calculus-Based Physics 1 and Multivariable Calculus. This ended up being the first semester of school where I really struggled, and my grades reflected that. I will add, both semesters in 2022 were probably worse, they just weren't college level semesters. That spring I took Calc 1 online as a homeschooled freshman. I was wholly unprepared to take that class and ended up retaking it when I started PSEO as a junior. And then in the fall, I took 3 classes at a new co-op, and I was getting straight A's in all of them. But that's because my teacher was very gracious with deadlines. She practically did not enforce them, and I ended up submitting most of my homework assignments 1 to 2 weeks past they were technically due. In taking physics and math, I found no time to really invest in my English class called the research paper or macroeconomics. I ended up earning a middle B grade and a low C grade in those 2 classes respectively. It was a pretty bad semester overall. Fortunately, in my physics class, my professor curved the grades significantly, so I locked in a C grade going into the final exam. I was still dumb enough to not study at all for my multivariable calculus final, thinking that reviewing physics would have enough math. It did not, and even though the math final was only on our last chapter of our material, that ended up being the only chapter I did not study before the exam. My physics and math exams were also back-to-back the same morning, which was nerve-wracking considering that meant I'd have no time to reset between my exams, but also exciting because that meant as soon as I woke up that morning, in about 6 hours, I was finished with the semester. Plus, the Vikings were playing their Winter Warrior game that same Monday night, which made it definitely harder to focus on studying. The day of finals felt like a horror movie. It started off fun. I went to Caribou to get a coffee in the morning as a tasty caffeine source that ended up becoming Monster Energy throughout spring semester. But then as I was driving to school, since it's December in Minnesota, it was super cold and the roads were all really icy and snowy. Even my friend who was taking the same 2 classes said that he had been losing traction on his way to school. Not only did I crash the car as I had exited off the highway, but I failed my math test and my grade wasn't already high enough to pass the class. It was a miracle that the car was still functional afterwards. It was only less than a mile away from the parking lot, so I didn't have to drive very far with a disoriented steering wheel, but the cosmetic damage was significant. And my physics final was fine. I was already locked into a C grade, so it did not matter, but when it came to my math test, I looked at the first problem, did not know how to solve it, looked at problem 2, then 3, and the rest of the exam, and pardon my profanity, I was screwed. I got up, handed my test to the professor, and I apologized because I was not able to take the exam and I walked out. I was and am still so grateful of how supportive my mom was during this time. When I'd gotten back home, she was waiting right inside the door to give me a hug as I walked in, reading my disappointment. Then, since my professor had offered it, my mom convinced me to retake the test, knowing it was either retaking all of multivariable calculus or studying really hard for 1 day, retaking the final exam to pass the class. So I studied hard and had a lot of tutoring help, and I passed the class. 43% was all I needed on the final, having also completed the final problem set, which my professor likes to call a project. I did have some leftover guilt having failed my first math final, but I was fortunately able to enjoy winter break. Spring semester is where things get interesting. I was so excited to use the academic planner I had bought before the school year started. I was going to write down all my due dates, plan my studies, my days, weeks, months, etc. And then when the time came to actually use it, I was too lazy to write anything down. I just took 3 STEM classes because those are kind of hard. They were Calculus-Based Physics 2, which is the follow-up to Physics 1, along with Statics, which is an engineering core curriculum that my professor at Inverse suggested I take there if I can, and I also took linear algebra. Differential equations would be better for the civil engineering plan that I wanted to study, but it didn't fit into my schedule as well as linear algebra did. Any excuses I'd used throughout the year came to a halt following my early linear algebra and physics tests. I scored 36% on my first linear algebra test, bringing my grade down to a 39. For physics tests, though, they were just different. They were graded by quintile, which meant that the 41 and 21 I'd scored on my first 2 midterms were just good enough for a C and a D, respectively. And after my first linear algebra test, my professor allowed me to catch up on all the homework before the test and retake it, That brought my grade from an F up to a B, which quickly dropped down to a C and stayed there for the rest of the class. Then came my third physics midterm. I had scored 2 out of 60 on it, which brought my grade down to 48%, just outside of a C grade. After this, I knew I basically only had my physics midterm to really study for. Yes, I had a few homework assignments, quizzes, and labs to do, but they weren't a significant portion of my grade, so I mainly only used them knowing that they would be good practice for my physics final. Besides my physics tests, I was doing quite well after spring break. This was around the same time actually, that I had learned about my sister's cancer diagnosis, which motivated me a lot. I had 4 assignments in physics in particular that I was really proud of. 2 were homework assignments, on which I scored 86 and 96 on. The first one I had done 50% during an all-nighter that I had pulled soon after spring break, so I didn't have much to do after that. And the 96 I earned after about 8.5 hours of studying. That is how long physics homework assignments have taken in that class. The other 2 were quizzes that I took. The first quiz I took after spring break, I aced, which was the first time I had aced the quiz maybe that whole semester. The second one, I earned 11 out of 15 on the same homework assignment, the same chapter as the 96 I earned on a homework assignment. 73% may not sound impressive, but considering my average quiz grade was 5 out of 15, those 2 quizzes, along with the other 2 homework assignments, actually lifted my grade about 1 to 2 points. And at that point in the semester, I took any grade increase proudly because I was kind of desperate. Finals week is where things got important. It started on Friday with my statics exam, which was nice because it was the one exam I wasn't that stressed about for, so it was nice to get out of the way. Then the following Monday would be my physics exam, which I was ultra focused on, and then math was on Wednesday. I only reviewed for statics the morning of the exam, and it was good enough to earn me an 85 on that test and an 83 grade for the overall class. For my linear algebra exam, I planned to just study following my physics exam since I would have about 2 days to study for it, and that study included finishing my final project, which I also aced, which was really nice because it was the same day as my physics final, and I was really stressed not knowing my grade then, so it was nice to have a mood boost with an aced math assignment. For my physics class, I had some extra credit points, but I still needed over 70 on my final exam to pass the class. My 3 midterm scores were 41, 21, and 3%, which combining those scores added up to actually 66% given rounding. So I needed to outscore my 3 previous tests combined to pass the class. And for my exam, our professor allows us to use formula sheets, but since mine was half faded and the other half were formulas I did not know how to use, I knew it was time to just rewrite my entire formula sheet. So my last few days before my exam, I completely rewrote every formula shown in the e-textbook, along with writing the definitions of every variable used, since certain variables will change definitions based on context. And then I also wrote some advice tips that helped me during homework assignments, since that's where I performed well on, along with example problems from previous tests, since that is where I would crumble. Somehow I scored well on Physics 1 tests and not at all on Physics 2, which is crazy because I did a lot more homework during Physics 2 than Physics 1. And all that preparation paid off in big ways, including the definitions I wrote down and the example problems. I finally saw my physics professor had updated the grades the same day as the test after track practice that day. And I was very nervous to check my grades since I was so uncertain because a lot of the tests just felt iffy. I didn't even expect to have passed the class. But then I checked my final grade and I see final grade 55 out of 100 for a C and final exam grade 11.85 out of 15, which was 79%. I passed Physics 2. I did a little fun to most of my exams, wearing a few of my favorite Vikings jerseys to each one. For my statics exam, I wore my Adrian Peterson jersey and, this Vikings hat I'd gotten from the draft party back in 2023. And then for my physics test, I actually wore this Iowa State polo because it was the most important exam. I needed this exam to even pass the class, and I wore my Iowa State polo, which my sister had gotten me for my birthday. She also went to Iowa State, and that's where I want to go. And a D grade will not transfer to the College of Engineering. So I wore this as a little bit of extra motivation. And then for my math test, I wore my Justin Jefferson jersey, since that's my favorite jersey, to emphasize the end of high school, and it's white, and it was hot because it's the middle of May, and it was like beginning of summer. Then on May 17th, the Saturday after my finals, my homeschool co-op held our graduation ceremony at New Life Church, since that is the church that sponsors our co-op. I graduated in a class of 5 people. One was my best friend from pre-COVID co-op, along with 3 girls, one who also left the co-op during COVID, one who had joined the same year that I had left to start PSEO, and then the third girl actually never participated in our co-op, but since she was homeschooled, and homeschoolers rarely get there on graduation, my co-op offered her to be included in it. Because we actually have had non-co-op members participate in our graduating ceremony. And because the ceremony is so small, only 5 of us, we control basically every aspect of the ceremony. We each submit a slideshow of 30 pictures with some baby pictures, senior pictures, and then others, along with music to play during the slideshow. Then we also submit an audio recording of us thanking different people who had contributed to our lives and our education. We also submit a hymn for the congregation to sing, since homeschoolers are all just extremely sheltered Christians. And even our graduating card, we get to choose how that stuff looks. Graduation, invitation, whatever, that's too hard to say. My thank yous recording was about as long as the other 4 combined, because I have 8 siblings and I thanked each of them individually, along with one of my aunts and my grandpa. Each graduate also receives a parent challenge, where one or both parents, most of the time the dad, will give advice to his graduate. And because I've always been an emotional boy, I cried for a significant amount of my ceremony. And then my one brother who actually came, my 3 brothers who just didn't show up, decided to film me during the hymn, which was definitely very embarrassing. But my favorite part of the whole thing was that during one of the later slideshows right before mine, I see in the back of the worship center my oldest sister walk in with my little nephew. I was so close to just breaking down knowing that my little nephew would get to watch his uncle graduate high school. Running cross country, skiing in Nordic, and running in track as a senior is where a lot of the fun this year came. I was a captain for my cross country and track teams. I was not qualified to be a captain for Nordic. And I dedicated my cross country season to my brother and track season to my sister. Nordic season was not as important to me comparatively. It was more of just a fun bridge sport between the 2 seasons. Something fun with cross country season is that it starts around the same time as the NFL season does. And the Vikings dedicated their season to the rookie cornerback Kyrie Jackson, who died during the offseason. And they started their season 5-0, finishing 14-3. And this just reminded me of how much harder an individual or a team will work when honoring someone that they love. But cross-country training starts in the summer, with summer run club in June and then captain's practices in July and August. Every summer, the top runners have a goal of running at least 300 miles, since we have a 300-mile club for the summer. The previous 2 summers, I had ran 340 miles and 380. So as a senior, I hit 420 miles right as the summer running season finished. The start of every cross-country season includes our 2-mile run under the lights time trial, where every runner on the team will meet on the high school track and run when it's dark and the lights are turned on. I had ran the exact time I'd aimed for, 11 minutes 10 seconds, since that was 10 seconds behind my 2-mile PR at the time and I was not at top shape yet. Then it took a turn. I ran 21:51 at our first meet of the season, slower than any time since 7th grade when I started cross country. But then the following week, I followed it up with an all-time PR of 18:06 at St. Croix Bluffs, which is the one meet we've ran every single year since the school opened back in 2009. This was also a rare race in which I had next to no pain throughout the whole race besides just race fatigue. I wasn't really hurting at all until the very end of the race where I'm able to just push myself to the end. That kind of race actually became more and more common throughout the season as I was just getting healthier. I ran my first official sub-18 race at conference that year running 17:37. I say official because as a sophomore I ran 17:54 on the same course, but it was about 200 meters short. My senior year was also my first time running at our sections meet. As a sophomore, I was only an alternate and I didn't get a chance to race it. Then as a junior, I was injured nearly the entire season with a stress fracture in my middle metatarsal on my left foot. And I had only healed up right before the sections meet, so I wasn't able to run it. I ran 18:13 at that race, good for my third best time ever at that time, over a really hilly course. My final race of the season was thankfully sub 18 minutes, as I ran 17:55 at Nike Cross Regionals in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. My only real disappointment of cross country is that I was never able to run my goal time of 17:17, which is the family record that my mom still holds since her days at Iowa State. As badly as I wanted the season to continue on, I already had 6 whole years of cross country under my belt, so it was time for me to say farewell. And since I was the team leader, I spoke at my team's banquet after the season was finished, and I closed my speech by handing off my captain hat to my good junior friend who would become a captain the following year. I skied varsity in one race this season, our first race, and I skied JV the rest of the season. And what was really fun this year is my huge time drops. As a junior, I skied around 23 minutes in skate, and then I dropped my time down to 19:21 at our Highland Park race, which was my season PR. In Classic, I skied around 29 minutes, my only Classic race as a junior. It was the same race. It was the only race I'd fallen during as a junior. And then I dropped down to 2018 as a senior at conference. I set a goal of dropping under 20 minutes in both techniques before the season started. And obviously I did that in skate, but I was very close to it in Classic, but I was also happy with the time I had at the end of the season anyway. Also at conference, in Classic, some of my house church friends came to watch, which also made it a lot of fun. Classic at conference was a great race. I mean, I PR'd by more than a minute there. Skate, though, was terrible. The weather, it was like 40 degrees that day. The snow was all mushy. In fact, instead of putting on any glide wax, all of our skis were structured, which is meant to make the ski not suction to the snow as much. And I was still like wiggling from ski suction throughout most of the race. My skate time at conference was 4 minutes slower than my PR time, but that's just because the conditions were that bad. And I was actually pretty happy that my friends did not come to watch that race and they only watched Classic, because Classic was actually a great race at conference. Skate was not. Like I mentioned during the family portion of the video, every year my Nordic ski team, the weekend before Christmas, rides the bus up to Cable, Wisconsin, where the Birkebeiner trailheads are. We load up early on Friday morning around 6 a.m., and once we arrive, it's just all-day skiing with little coaching activities throughout the day. Then we head back to Lodge in Hayward. Saturday is the big day. We do a little bit of warm-up skiing in the morning before splitting into groups to start long-distance, non-stop skiing. I joined the top group, and I barely survived. We skied a little over 14 miles from the Birkebeiner trailhead down to Highway 00. After roughly 2.5 hours of skiing, I finally arrived and was the last person in my group to get there. And we just relaxed in the building we skied to until our bus arrived. Sunday is just skiing for fun, skier's choice. Coaches are available, but none is required. Everyone basically just does their own thing. Many skiers went to the nearby gift shop that had been built just the previous summer. And like I mentioned earlier, I knew I'd regret not getting souvenirs, so I skied over there to see what they had. And after seeing no Sweden merchandise, but Finland, Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, I ended up just buying the 13 little stocking stuffers for all my family. Even after the season finished, I continued to ski since I decided to do the Cortalopa in February. The Birkie is 55 kilometers and goes all the way from the trailheads in Cable to downtown Hayward. The Cordy is just 29 kilometers, and it starts at Highway 00 and then continues to downtown Hayward. So basically the second half of the trip that we had taken at camp back in December. I expected it to take close to 3 hours since it's 18 miles, and the 14-mile ski trip I did took 2.5 hours. It took me less than 2 hours, and I was only around 2 minutes behind one of my teammates, and I had no clue until he said so after the race. After the Cordy, I was just anticipating track, but it was at this time that my sister had gotten diagnosed with breast cancer, so I decided every step I'd take in track would honor her. That came in big time, especially during my early 1 and 2 mile races, since those were my two favorite events. I worked so hard as a junior just to run 11 minutes 0.4 seconds in the 2 mile as my best time. Then in my first outdoor race as a senior, I run the 2 mile and break 11 minutes with a time of 10 minutes 53 seconds. Funny is my cross country head coach doesn't even coach track, but he still came to watch, which made it really special. In the mile, I had already broken 5 minutes the year before, so I didn't have really a goal time in mind besides just setting PRs. But my big mile day came at conference. The previous 2 years I ran the 2 mile at conference, so my coach let me switch those around. And my conference and section races are where my improved pacing came to play big time. A couple of my track friends who graduated the year before came to watch my conference and section meets, which was fun because they would get to watch my last competitive 1 mile at conference. And I ran 4:49, which was a 4-second PR. Now, after breaking 11 minutes in the 2 mile, I continued to improve my time. I ran it 2 more times all season, and all 3 races brought bigger PRs than the last. I started by beating my junior PR by 7 seconds from 11 minutes 0.4 down to 10:53. Then I dropped a 9-second PR, running 10:44 just days before my 19th birthday. My third and final 2 mile race of the season, I hit a 13-second PR, finally dropping my time down to 10 minutes 32 seconds. It was practically my final competitive race of the season because I also ran the 4x8 relay at sections, but I wasn't concerned about that race. The 800 meter tended to be my fun race, which is wild because no race hurts more in the moment to me than the 800. I ran 4 relays in the 4x8 that season, along with running my first open 800 meter race since 8th grade. I decided before the season that my goal time for the 800 would be 2:09, honoring my nephew's birthday. And it's crazy that I never ran that because a lot of my teammates ran that time specifically. I opened the season with a 2:15 at our U of M GRIAC indoor track meet, beating my time from the same meet last year of 2 minutes 20.9 seconds. By the end of the season, my PR was 2:12 from my open 800. Nearly the last month of track came after turning 19, but I'm still including it here because it's only a month. And knowing that I wouldn't play sports in college, I wanted to do something special at the end of my senior track season as a grand finale. For a while, I considered running either a marathon or a triathlon, but I ended up just running a half marathon by myself. I ran for 1 more week after track was finished before running my half marathon the day before my open house. I did it then so I could tell people about it at my open house. And my dad officiated it. He gave me the standard 3-call start that announcers give before starting my run. For the first half, I felt comfortable, but then around mile 7, I was tired. My last 3 miles, I was actually quite glad that I only planned to run a half marathon, because before running it, I was considering adding on if I felt good enough. I didn't, and I was perfectly happy running a half marathon and calling it my grand finale to high school sports. My job is easily the part of my life that took the most personal growth to enjoy, meaning nobody could have helped me enjoy it more than myself. 2024 summer was the first time since I got my job that my employment changed in a big way. Following a trainer's quiz that I took back in March and bi-weekly meetings with a trainer's manager, in early July, right before I headed to my cabin for 4th of July week, I met with one of the directors who said, You may be closer than you think. And just over 1 month later, I took the trainer's test and I passed. I got my promotion. I became a team trainer. But since I was about to leave temporarily for cross country in school, I requested that I train sooner. My first day on training was on running, the position that runs orders out to customers, and my second day was on drive-thru drinks, which is my favorite position. Both days went pretty smoothly because running is just a very straightforward position, and my trainee caught on to the drinks position pretty easily. Then I left for cross country, came back in November, and throughout the school year was really the time that I learned how to enjoy my job. Not in the vague, shallow sense, I love my job, but in the way that I can actually look forward to going to work, and while I'm there, I don't have to worry about when I'm going on break or clocking out. I can just enjoy the job that I'm performing. Habits that I've learned that have helped my job tremendously include reflecting on choices I made during previous shifts, whether good or bad, that affected them, along with staying productive at all times, because practically there is always something to do, and do it, knowing it'll make my job and my coworkers, along with the customer's day, all better. More recently, customer-focused jobs like order taking and dining room have gone from my least favorite positions closer to my favorites. I remember that I'm an extrovert, and talking to people generally makes my day better. Working those positions and prioritizing talking to customers have made me enjoy them more. Another habit that's helped me a lot recently, as in the last couple of months, has been avoiding checking the clock at all times. Time checking was a really bad habit that I had, and I did not realize it until basically now. I think that when I work an 8-hour shift, the first 7 hours will feel as long as hour number 8 if I check the clock the same number of times. 5 minutes will feel like an hour if I check the clock that frequently. I saved the best for last because this is where a lot of my life changes come. Ultimately, everything changed for me when I let God be an active member of my life. Growing up Christian, I always thought I just was, that I didn't have to personally practice my faith. Up to this point, I was always a member in Awana. I went to the homeschool co-op part of New Life Church called ACES, and I would read my Bible to check it off my list. For me though, it was basically going through the motions. One choice I personally made as a junior was joining my high school's FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. But otherwise, I wasn't doing anything special. I became aware of the sin that I was living in. Like any adolescent, especially a teenage boy, I struggle with lust. I also struggle with respecting my parents, foul language, and laziness. And I knew the only way to ultimately end these behaviors was to seek the one who saved me when I was a kid. That's Jesus. Without any outside influence like church groups or siblings, that summer I decided to read my Bible regularly. I read my Bible nearly every morning, starting in Genesis through half of Leviticus before resuming in Matthew in the New Testament. This choice had the biggest impact on my faith, my life, and my decisions behind closed doors. I also began listening to worship music a lot more frequently. It became my go-to playlist, instead of rappers like NF and Eddie Mineo or Madden video game music. I also prayed whenever I thought about it, usually for grace and strength to face my temptations. Philippians 4:7 says, "The peace of God surpasses all understanding," but it does not just mean God will make your life nice. There was barely a day that summer where I felt stressed. I made another big decision that has drastically changed my faith life, and that was switching churches, very informally. I didn't even notice it happen until I realized I had not attended my childhood church, New Life, in months. It eventually became a whole year. And this is not at all a knock on New Life. I have amazing friends who still go there, and I will always cherish that place. But in words from the man who taught my second grade Sunday school class, if you don't like it here, that means God doesn't want you at New Life, and that's okay. That transition away from New Life began with my oldest sister forcing my little sister and I to go with her husband to then Salt City Church. Salt City is a part of the SALT network, whose aim is reaching college students, since college is the place where many Christian students will fall away from their faith. This college age focus really attracted my little sister and I, compared to New Life, which is a much older church by comparison. That day when my oldest sister brought us to Salt City Church was back in 2022. And that first time I actually did not enjoy it. In fact, I napped through a significant portion of the sermon on my little sister's shoulder. But then later after that, it renamed to Redemption Church. And my little sister and I, along with my parents, went with my oldest sister and her husband to a new location it was at. And that was the first time I had heard Pastor Drew Stevens, and I had soon learned how much I love listening to his sermons. Sometime after that, it moved to its permanent location. And that church has become the place my family calls our new home, because in the words of my second grade Sunday school teacher, God wants you there. One of my most transformative experiences during my membership at Redemption Church was when my little sister invited my youngest sister and I to the National Salt Conference the first weekend of 2025. Since she's the associate director of the salt company in Syracuse, New York, we all signed up under that salt company, but since my cousin attends salt through Iowa State, I mostly stayed with that group. There is nothing like being in a room full of 6,000 Christian college students, all 6,000 hands raised in the air during worship. That was my favorite part of the whole weekend, and it was not that close. At the conference, we had worship services Friday and Saturday night, along with Saturday and Sunday morning, and at each sermon, a pastor from a different college spoke, such as one was from Oregon and one from UNLV. We also had smaller sermon-style sessions throughout that Saturday on many different topics I could not name out. I also joined my brother's South St. Paul House Church, which is part of the Twin Cities Church, around the time I turned 18. Every Sunday we have a Bible study that alternates between a lesson and an application. We sing hymns to start every morning and have a children's story time. What made me really comfortable there was my brother telling me that I'm actually allowed to contribute to discussions. Being one of the youngest there, at the time I joined there were only 2 girls younger than me, I thought I was just supposed to be quiet and listen. But knowing that I was allowed to talk and contribute to discussions made me enjoy it a lot more. Everybody there is very welcoming, all happy to see each other, and I got to experience that as a new member. Sometime later, my brother got me my own study book, and then I joined the group online. My house church leader skis the Cordy every year with other members of the Twin Cities Church, and he invited me to go with him, considering I already planned to buy my own ski equipment rather than renting like I did during my first year. It sounded like a lot of fun and a great idea, and it was. I'll skip ahead to the end of my senior year, right around the time I turned 19 and graduated, since this is where the final big event of this topic and this video comes. Back to the subject of Awana. In May, I completed 6 years of being an LIT, that's leader in training, for my local Awana club, helping kids kindergarten through 2nd grade in Sparks and 3rd through 6th grade in TNT, after volunteering since I was in 7th grade. A fun way to celebrate the end of my senior year as a member of Awana was sharing what it has meant to me as a student and leader to my entire Awana club. It was so fun, since I volunteered with many of the leaders there, and I've been a leader for many of the kids in that room. I also earned my citation for 10 years in Awana between 3rd grade in TNT and senior year in Journey. To make a very long story short, what really made this year so special for me was my new relationship to God, following Him personally behind closed doors, along with the new churches that I've joined and found real warm homes at, dedicating my sports seasons to my siblings in cross country, since my brother showed tremendous leadership to me back in 7th grade, and in track, knowing that I could push through the pain since my sister would face worse in her breast cancer, leading me to drop huge PRs in all my major events, and learning how to enjoy my work at Chick-fil-A, being able to serve customers better, which makes me like my job a lot more, along with the obstacles I had to make it over during my senior year of school, since I failed 3 different classes at different points and I managed to pass all 3 of them.